The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the Kansas plains in streaks of gold and crimson. The wind carried the sweet scent of wild prairie flowers, bending the tall grasses like waves on an endless sea. The silence of the open land was broken only by the rhythmic clatter of hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk, circling above. A lone rider moved swiftly across the plain, her long black hair streaming behind her like a shadow of night. She was tall and graceful, a striking figure against the blazing sky, wrapped in a blanket of deep crimson and worn leather. Her name was Nayeli, a young Apache woman traveling far from her homeland, seeking a distant relative rumored to live near the small settlement of Red Creek. Her horse, a sleek sorrel mare named Luna, responded to her gentle commands, ears flicking and nostrils flaring as if sensing the woman's own tension. Nayeli's journey had been long and perilous. She had traversed rivers and ridges, evaded rattlesnakes, and faced the relentless sun, all in pursuit of a hope that burned quietly within her heart. Yet, as fate often weaves its threads, a sudden mishap shattered the rhythm of her ride. Luna stumbled on a hidden rock, her hooves twisting in the uneven earth. Nayeli's grip faltered, and before she could recover, she tumbled to the ground. Pain exploded in her leg, sharp and unforgiving, and she lay sprawled in the dust, winded and disoriented. For a long moment, she lay still, staring at the endless sky above, feeling the harsh sting of the injury coursing through her. Panic and isolation threatened to overwhelm her. Out here, far from towns or settlements, there was no one to hear her cries. Her eyes welled with tears, not just from pain but from the cold, crushing weight of solitude. Then she heard it. The distant sound of a wagon creaking over the plains, faint but distinct. Her heart leaped. Could it be rescue? She summoned the last of her strength and called out, her voice trembling but clear. Help, please. The sound of the wagon grew louder, accompanied by the steady clop of another horse. A man appeared over the distant rise, his wide-brimmed hat shielding his eyes from the sun. He was broad-shouldered, wearing dust-stained jeans and a simple linen shirt, his boots coated in prairie dust. There was something lonely in his stance, a quiet distance that spoke of long days spent in solitude. This was Samuel Carter, a farmer who had chosen the isolation of the plains over the bustle of town life. Few ventured near his land, and fewer still ever glimpsed the soft melancholy that often clouded his blue-gray eyes. When Samuel saw Nayeli lying on the ground, he spurred his horse forward without hesitation. He had seen travelers pass through before, but never one so regal and striking as this. Kneeling beside her, he spoke gently. Easy now. You're safe. Don't try to move. His voice was calm, carrying both authority and kindness. Pain flared anew in Nayeli's leg as she tried to shift, but Samuel's steady hands held her in place. He examined the injury quickly but carefully. It was a clean break, he realized, yet one that required immediate care. With practiced efficiency, he helped her onto his horse's back, ensuring she was secure. Then, leading her own mare beside them, he guided them toward his homestead in the distance, a modest farmhouse surrounded by a patchwork of fields and a single wooden barn. As they rode, Nayeli studied Samuel in quiet awe. There was a gentleness in him, a quiet bravery, and a patience she had not expected to find in the rough, isolated life of a frontier farmer. She could feel herself drawn to him, even as the pain in her leg reminded her of the fragility of her own journey. By the time the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the plains into a soft twilight, they arrived at Samuel's homestead. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, promising warmth, safety, and perhaps the beginning of an unlikely bond between a lonely farmer and a wandering Apache woman who had fallen into his care. The farmhouse smelled of fresh hay, wood smoke, and the faint temps of iron from old tools. Samuel led Nayeli inside, her weight pressing lightly against his arm. Every step sent a jolt of pain through her leg, but she kept her face composed. Unwilling to burden him with moans, she had learned to hide on long journeys. This way, Samuel said gently, guiding her to a sturdy chair near the hearth. He gestured for her to sit, his hand steady as he examined her leg once more by the flickering light of the fireplace. You've got a clean break, he murmured, more to himself than to her. I can set it, but you'll have to stay put. You won't be riding for a while. Nayeli nodded. I can stay, she said quietly. Her voice had a melodic cadence, soft and deliberate, like a song carried on the wind. It was the first time she had spoken since the fall, and it seemed to ripple through the room, catching Samuel's attention. He nodded, already moving to gather supplies. Clean linen, bandages, splints, items he had kept for emergencies but had rarely used. His hands were rough from years of labor in the fields, yet they moved with surprising precision as he worked to set her leg. Nayeli watched him, studying the lines of his face, the concentration in his eyes, and something unspoken stirred within her. "You're calm," she said, after a pause, her voice tinged with admiration. I thought someone would panic if they had to do this." Samuel glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Experience. And I've helped myself more times than I care to count." His eyes softened. "But you've been through a long ride. You need rest." The fire crackled, filling the quiet house with warmth. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly into shadow, the stars beginning to glimmer against the velvet night. Samuel placed a blanket across Nayeli's shoulders, careful not to jostle her leg. She shivered, partly from the chill, partly from the closeness of him. She realized, with a start, how lonely his life must be, yet there was a quiet dignity in his solitude. "You live out here alone?" she asked after a long pause, her voice hesitant. Samuel shrugged, settling onto a chair across from her. "Mostly. It's peaceful, and the land gives me all I need, but it can get lonely." His gaze flickered to hers, and she felt a warmth in her chest at the unspoken honesty. "And you're far from home. Why come here alone?" Nayeli's fingers toyed with the edge of her blanket, the firelight casting shadows across her face. She wanted to tell him everything about her family, her homeland, the journey she had undertaken, but the words felt heavy. I was looking for someone," she admitted softly. "A relative, but the journey, it has been long." She trailed off, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the room was filled with an understanding that required no further explanation. Samuel nodded, leaning back with a thoughtful expression. "Well, you're safe now. You'll heal here, and I'll make sure of it." His voice was firm but kind, carrying a reassurance that made her chest unclench for the first time since her fall. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Samuel occasionally brought her water or adjusted the blanket, each gesture careful, considerate, and intimate in a way that made Nayeli's heart flutter. She noticed small things about him, the steadiness of his hands, the faint scar along his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her. When it was time for bed, Samuel helped her to a small cot near the hearth. "I'll stay nearby, in case you need anything," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice, only quiet attentiveness. Nayeli felt an unexpected warmth at the thought of someone watching over her, someone whose presence was protective rather than intrusive. As she lay down, she realized how much she had longed for this simple safety, this quiet companionship after months of travel. Outside, the wind whispered through the grasses, carrying a promise of days yet to come. Nayeli closed her eyes, her thoughts drifting to the mysterious, gentle man who had appeared at the perfect moment in the vast loneliness of the plains. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time began to glow, a fragile, tender hope that maybe, just maybe, the lonely farmer could become more than a savior. The first days of Nayeli's recovery passed slowly, measured by the rise and fall of the sun over the endless plains. Samuel proved to be a careful, almost tender caretaker. He moved with a quiet efficiency that contrasted sharply with the roughness of the frontier life outside his walls. Each morning, he would bring her warm water, wash her leg, and check the splints he had fashioned from the sturdy oak trees nearby. The pain was constant, yet under Samuel's watchful eyes, it became bearable. Nayeli, normally independent and self-reliant, found herself relying on him in ways she had never anticipated. At first, she resisted the closeness, wary of letting anyone see her vulnerability. But Samuel's calm presence had a way of softening her defenses. He never lingered unnecessarily, yet he was always near enough to offer help, to provide comfort, or simply to share silence that didn't feel empty. One evening, after the sun had sunk and the fire glowed with a gentle warmth, Samuel sat across from her in the small room, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands. "Tell me about your people," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with genuine curiosity. Nayeli hesitated, then nodded. "I am Apache," she said softly, her voice carrying the pride of her heritage. "We are strong, we are proud, and we live close to the land, always watching the skies and the seasons. My people taught me to ride before I could even walk properly, to respect the animals, and to understand the winds. It is who I am." Samuel listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. "It sounds beautiful," he said finally. "I've spent my life with these plains, yet I've never known them like that. Like they breathe with people as you do." Nayeli felt a warmth at his words. Few people had ever noticed the depth of her connection to the land. Most saw only the surface, a young woman traveling alone, a stranger in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Samuel, however, seemed to understand. "And you?" she asked, curiosity brightening her eyes. "You've lived here all your life." He nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "More or less. My parents taught me to farm, to care for the land. I've always been content, mostly, but there's a loneliness to it, a quiet that follows you at night. I didn't expect company, not like this." His gaze softened. "And certainly not someone like you." Nayeli's heart fluttered at the words. She could feel a gentle tension building between them, subtle yet undeniable. The room seemed smaller now, the firelight drawing their faces closer together, yet neither spoke further of it, letting the silence linger, comfortable and full of possibility. Over the following days, Nayeli's trust in Samuel grew. She allowed him to tend to her leg with less fear, even laughing softly when he winced at her flinches. In return, he shared stories of his childhood, of summers spent racing horses with his older brother, of winters trapped in the farmhouse during blizzards, of dreams that had slowly settled into the rhythms of the land at times. They would sit in the quiet of the evening, the prairie wind carrying faint scents of wild sage and earth. Nayeli would hum softly, a song from her youth, and Samuel would listen, captivated by the lilting melody that seemed to echo the vastness of the plains. In these moments, they were no longer a lone traveler and a solitary farmer. They were two souls finding connection in a world that often demanded isolation. One afternoon, as Nayeli struggled to shift herself slightly in her chair, Samuel reached out instinctively. "Let me help," he said, guiding her gently until she was more comfortable. Their hands brushed, and a spark of awareness passed between them, unspoken but electric. Nayeli looked down, cheeks warming, while Samuel cleared his throat, pretending to focus on her leg. "It's strange," she murmured, almost to herself. "I've been on the road for so long, and yet here, with you, it feels safe even." "Right." Samuel's blue-gray eyes softened, capturing hers with a quiet intensity. "You'll heal," he said gently. "And maybe, when the plains seem less lonely, you'll know that there's someone who cares." That night, as Nayeli lay in the cot by the fire, she felt the slow, growing pull of something deeper than gratitude. It was something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine, a possibility of companionship, perhaps even love, in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And as the wind whispered through the grasses outside, she realized that the plains, wide, open, and full of uncertainty, had also brought her something unexpected, the beginning of a connection that might change her life forever. By the time the fourth week of Nayeli's stay arrived, the sharp pain in her leg had dulled to a persistent ache, and the splints Samuel had fashioned were now replaced with a sturdy leather brace. She could walk short distances with his support, and the once daunting plains now called to her with the same freedom she had felt before her fall. Samuel observed her progress with quiet satisfaction. "Careful," he said as she took tentative steps across the farmhouse floor. "One wrong move and you'll be back to square one." Nayeli smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I'm not a child. I can walk, Samuel." He chuckled, shaking his head. "No one's calling you a child. Just, don't forget, the plains are not forgiving." A week later, Samuel led Nayeli outside, the wide horizon stretching before them in endless waves of golden grass. Luna, her sorrel mare, waited tethered to a post, ears flicking at their approach. Nayeli's heart quickened. It had been weeks since she had felt the wind in her hair atop her horse, the thrill of riding across open land. "You ready?" Samuel asked, adjusting the brim of his hat. Nayeli nodded, gripping the reins tightly. Samuel helped her onto Luna's back, steadying her as she settled into the familiar rhythm of riding. "Feels like flying," she whispered, eyes bright with exhilaration. Samuel followed on his own horse, leading them toward the rolling plains. The wind whipped past their faces, carrying the scents of wildflowers and sun-baked earth. Nayeli laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to echo across the hills. Samuel couldn't help but grin, watching her, feeling a warmth in his chest that had been absent for years. As they rode together, they spoke little, letting the land itself tell its story. Occasionally, Samuel pointed out landmarks, a gnarled oak, a hidden stream, a hill that provided a sweeping view of the valley below. Nayeli absorbed it all, noting the quiet pride in his tone, the subtle way he moved with the land, as though he had grown from it. Eventually, they reached a small rise overlooking a river meandering lazily through the plains. Samuel dismounted first and helped Nayeli down. They stood side by side, the horses grazing nearby. The sky painted in brilliant shades of orange and violet as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "You've made this place home," Nayeli said softly, her eyes tracing the familiar contours of his land. Samuel's gaze swept across the plains, then back to her. "It's not much," he said humbly, "but it's mine, and I think I'm glad you're here to see it with me." Nayeli felt a flutter in her chest, her pulse quickening. She turned to him, their shoulders brushing. The air between them seemed charged with something unspoken, a magnetic pull neither could ignore. For a long moment, they simply stood there, letting the quiet of the plain surround them. Then Samuel reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Nayeli's face. Her breath caught at the touch, and for the first time, she let herself feel the depth of her attraction to this quiet, steady man. I never expected," Samuel began, his voice low and hesitant, "to have someone like you, someone who changes everything." Nayeli met his gaze, her eyes softening. "I never expected to find someone who cares," she whispered. "Not out here, not on these plains." Slowly, almost shyly, their hands met, fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had always belonged together. The golden light of sunset bathed them in warmth, the world around them fading until it was just the two of them, hearts beating in quiet unison. After a while, Samuel pulled back slightly, smiling with a mix of tenderness and admiration. "We'd better head back before it gets dark," he said. Though neither moved immediately, Nayeli nodded, her heart still racing, and climbed back onto Luna with his help. They rode home together, closer than before, the horses' hooves drumming a steady rhythm beneath them. The wind carried a promise of more than recovery. It carried the promise of love growing quietly but surely on the open prairie. That night, as they sat by the hearth once more, their hands brushed occasionally, lingering longer each time. Words were unnecessary. The connection between them had grown into something profound, unspoken yet undeniable. The plains outside stretched endlessly, but inside the farmhouse, warmth, trust, and the tender beginnings of love bloomed like a fire that would not easily be extinguished. For Nayeli, the journey that had begun with a fall had led to something she had never dared to hope for, a companion, a protector, and perhaps, in time, something deeper than either of them could yet name. The prairie, vast and golden under the midday sun, had always seemed safe to Samuel. It was a place of routine and familiarity, a land he knew like the lines etched on his own hands. But that afternoon, a shadow fell across the horizon, distant yet ominous, carrying a tension that prickled the skin and tightened the chest. Nayeli was helping Samuel repair a fence along the northern edge of his property. Her movements had grown confident again, the leather brace supporting her leg, Luna grazing nearby. She smiled at Samuel, brushing her hair back from her face. "I think I can manage the next section on my own," she said. Her voice carried a pride he had come to cherish. Samuel nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I know you can. Just stay alert. The plains are calm, but they're never quiet for long." She raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like something's coming." And perhaps he had been right. The distant rumble of hooves reached them before anything else. At first, it was subtle, almost mistaken for the wind or the low growl of the earth itself. But then they saw them. 3 figures riding fast across the plains, dust trailing like smoke behind their horses. They were not familiar travelers, nor neighbors. There was something rough and determined about them. Their eyes fixed ahead as if tracking a target. Samuel moved instinctively, placing himself between Nayeli and the riders. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice firm. He scanned the landscape, calculating. These were outlaws, men who preyed on isolated farms, and he knew from experience that a confrontation could be dangerous. Nayeli's heart raced, but she refused to panic. "What do we do?" she asked, gripping a piece of wood from the fence like a makeshift weapon. Samuel shook his head, his jaw set. "We don't run, we stay calm. You trust me, right?" She nodded. "Always." The outlaws drew closer, their intentions clear. Samuel guided Nayeli toward the barn, moving swiftly despite the heat and the dust. Once inside, he handed her a rifle, the weight unfamiliar but grounding in her hands. "Stay low," he instructed. "Don't fire unless you have to. I'll handle the rest." The first rider reached the fence, his horse skidding slightly on the uneven earth. Samuel stepped out from behind a post, shotgun in hand, and called out, "This is my land. Turn back now, or you'll regret it." The men laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the plains. "Little man thinks he can scare us," one shouted. They rode closer, their intentions clear. They wanted his land, his livestock, perhaps even Nayeli herself as leverage. But Samuel did not falter. He fired a warning shot, the loud crack echoing across the open land. Nayeli's heart pounded as the air seemed to thrum with danger. She had never felt fear so intensely. Yet alongside it was a strange thrill. A raw reminder that life on the plains was as wild as it was beautiful. The outlaws hesitated, surprised by his marksmanship and resolve. Samuel stood firm, his presence commanding despite his solitude and quiet demeanor. Then, slowly, the riders pulled back, reassessing. One shouted a curse, but another whispered caution, and after tense moments that felt like hours, they turned their horses and disappeared over the horizon, leaving a swirl of dust and an uneasy calm behind. Naili lowered the rifle, hands trembling, and Samuel approached her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said quietly, admiration clear in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you being ready." Her chest heaved, and she felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't want to hide," she admitted. "I wanted to help. I wanted to stand with you." Samuel's expression softened, his hand brushing against hers. "Then we stand together. Always." For the first time, Nayeli truly felt the strength of their bond, forged not only in care and quiet companionship but now in shared danger. The plains, once a place of isolation, had become the stage for trust, courage, and a love that could weather the harshest winds. As the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in fiery shades, they walked back to the farmhouse side by side, their hands brushed, this time without hesitation. In the silence, filled only by the whisper of the grasses, they understood something unspoken. Life on the plains was unpredictable, wild, and sometimes dangerous, but together, they could face anything. That night, by the warmth of the fire, Nayeli allowed herself to rest against Samuel's shoulder. The threat of the day had passed, yet the adrenaline lingered, mingling with a new, profound closeness. She realized, with a quiet certainty, that the man who had saved her from a fall and tended her wounds had also captured her heart, a heart now prepared to face the wild, unpredictable life of the plains alongside him. The prairie had always been Samuel's domain, a land he knew like the back of his hand. Yet, one late afternoon, as the wind picked up and the clouds gathered like a dark army over the horizon, even he felt the first stirrings of unease. Nayeli was tending to Luna, brushing the mare's coat and humming softly, when he came to her side. "The weather's changing fast," Samuel warned, his eyes scanning the sky. "Storm's coming, and it's not a gentle one." Nayeli nodded, a shiver of anticipation running through her. She had faced danger before, bandits, long rides through uncertain lands, but there was something primal about a storm. The roar of the wind, the sudden flash of lightning, and the deep rumble of thunder carried a sense of power that humbled all who stood against it. They worked quickly together, securing the horses in the barn and tying down anything that might be swept away by strong winds. Samuel's hands moved with precision, his long experience guiding every action. Nayeli, though less practiced, followed his lead, her determination evident in the set of her jaw and the strength in her grip. As the first drops fell, heavy and cold, they moved inside the farmhouse. Samuel closed the shutters and lit candles, the flickering light casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the prairie became a chaotic symphony of wind and rain, the grass bowing under the force of the storm. Nayeli watched him as he moved about the room, his calm efficiency reassuring. She realized, in that moment, how deeply she trusted him, not just to protect her body, but to shield her spirit from fear. And as the storm grew louder, she felt the first real stirrings of longing and love, emotions that had been simmering quietly beneath the surface. "You okay?" Samuel asked, glancing at her with concern. "I'm fine," she said, though her hands sought his instinctively. The touch was fleeting at first, but it carried a weight that neither could ignore. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows, wind rattling the roof. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Nayeli gasped, instinctively moving closer to Samuel. He put an arm around her, pulling her near, his body a solid shield against the chaos outside. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice low and steady, more a promise than reassurance. Together, hours passed. The storm raged on, relentless, yet inside the farmhouse, Nayeli and Samuel found a strange kind of peace. They talked quietly, sharing stories of childhood dreams and losses, of family and the hopes that had carried them across difficult years. Each word, each laugh, each glance drew them closer, weaving a bond that the storm could not shake. At one point, a strong gust blew open the door slightly, and rain poured in. Samuel acted immediately, rushing to close it, but Nayeli grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, smiling through the rain-soaked hair sticking to her face. "Let me help." Together, they secured the door, their hands brushing, their laughter mingling with the roar of the storm. In that moment, fear and adrenaline gave way to a profound sense of intimacy. The storm outside became a backdrop to the fire growing between them, a metaphor for the strength and unpredictability of life they now faced side by side. As the night deepened, the storm began to wane, leaving behind a quiet, damp world under the glow of a full moon breaking through thinning clouds. Samuel led Nayeli to the hearth, where they sat in companionable silence. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he held her close, the warmth of the fire mingling with the warmth of their shared presence. "I've never felt so alive," Nayeli whispered, her voice soft but certain. "Not in months, not since the journey began. Being here, with you, it feels right." Samuel's hand moved to gently brush her hair from her face. "Neither have I," he said, his eyes reflecting both the firelight and the depth of his feelings. "I've lived a quiet life, content with the land, but with you, everything feels fuller, brighter, more alive." For the first time, words were no longer needed. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in their hearts, a reminder that life was unpredictable, wild, and sometimes dangerous. Yet it was also beautiful, full of love, trust, and the promise of a future they could face together. That night, as they finally settled to rest, Nayeli realized that her journey, which had begun with a fall, a broken leg, and the kindness of a lonely farmer, had led her not only to safety but to the discovery of a love as vast and untamed as the plains themselves. The morning after the storm, the prairie lay glistening under a pale golden sun. Raindrops clung to the long blades of grass like tiny jewels, and the scent of wet earth rose sweetly into the air. Samuel and Nayeli stepped outside, surveying the land. The storm had caused minor damage, a few broken fence posts, a toppled cart, but nothing beyond repair. The prairie, resilient as ever, seemed to reflect the couple's own endurance. "Not too bad," Samuel said, running a hand through his damp hair. "We'll fix it before nightfall. Nothing the two of us can't handle." Nayeli smiled, the bond between them stronger than ever. She walked beside him, her leather brace now fully supporting her, Luna grazing nearby. "I think the storm made me realize something," she said softly. "Life's unpredictable. You never know what's coming, but I want to face it with you." Samuel's gaze softened. "I want that too." They worked through the day together, repairing fences, tending to the animals, and restoring the farmhouse grounds. Each shared glance carried unspoken affection, each small gesture, handing a hammer, steadying a post, brushing rain-soaked hair from a face, spoke of love blossoming quietly, naturally, on the vast, open plains. They paused atop a small hill overlooking the valley. The prairie stretched endlessly, gold and green rippling in the breeze, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional distant herd. It was a breathtaking view, the kind that humbled all who saw it. And Nayeli felt her heart swell with a deep sense of belonging. "I never thought I'd stay in one place for long," she admitted, leaning lightly on Samuel's shoulder. "I've traveled so far, and yet here, I feel home." Samuel wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "That's exactly where you belong," he said. "Not just here, on the land, but with me. You've brought life back into these plains. Nayeli, you've brought it back into me." Nayeli tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "Samuel, He silenced her gently with a tender touch, his hand cupping her cheek. "I know," he whispered. Then, leaning down, he pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, a slow exploration, then more certain, more passionate, a promise of devotion and partnership. The wind swept across the prairie, but they felt nothing but each other, the world around them fading into insignificance. When they finally pulled back, smiles lingered on their faces, and their hands remained entwined. "We've been through a lot," Samuel said, chuckling softly. "Falling horses, outlaws, storms, and we're still standing. I'd say we make a good team." Nayeli laughed, her voice ringing clear in the open air. "The best team," she agreed. "And now, we can build something together. A life, right here." Over the following weeks, they worked side by side to restore the farmhouse completely. Samuel taught Nayeli the finer details of farm management, from mending equipment to understanding seasonal cycles, while she shared her knowledge of the land of plants, wildlife, and weather patterns, the wisdom passed down from her Apache ancestors. Together, they transformed the land into a thriving, harmonious homestead. Word of their partnership spread quietly through the nearby settlements. Samuel and Nayeli were no longer just a solitary farmer and a traveling woman. They had become a symbol of resilience, trust, and the promise of love that could endure even the harshest trials. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. Samuel and Nayeli sat on the porch of the farmhouse. Luna grazed nearby, the prairie calm once more. Nayeli leaned against Samuel, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her cheek. "You've changed everything for me," she said softly. "Not just the plains, but my life." "And you've changed mine," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "The plains will always be wild and unpredictable. But with you, Nayeli, I know we can face anything. Together." As the first stars began to twinkle, they watched the prairie stretch endlessly before them, a land of freedom, possibility, and promise. Their journey had begun with a fall, a broken leg, and the kindness of a lonely farmer. But it had ended with something far greater. A love as wide and untamed as the plains themselves. A partnership that would endure the tests of life. And a future built together, hand in hand, heart to heart. For Samuel and Nayeli, the plains were no longer merely land to work or traverse. They were home. They were sanctuary. And above all, they were proof that even in the wild, unforgiving West, love could bloom with the strength and resilience of the land itself.